Hi everyone, my name is Ryan Hauer of Hauer Power Electrical, and today we're going to go over commercial maintenance with special respect to thermal imaging cameras. The big part with thermal imaging cameras and why it's so crucial for commercial property maintenance is because you can detect problems before they become bigger problems. So that's what we're going to dive into here today.
Can you start by explaining what thermal imaging is and how it works in diagnosing electrical issues in commercial panels?
Great question. So thermal imaging lets us take a photo of a panel, which you might be able to see here. And this way we can diagnose the panel through a photo by telling us what the hot spots are and get ahead of any problematic issues. So in this scenario, we can tell that this breaker right here is about 50 degrees Celsius, and so is this breaker right here, which makes sense. This is drawing a couple of hydraulic loads right now currently, and if it was a consistent 50 degrees Celsius load, that would give us insight as to this breaker is going to break down before any other breaker. And so with that, if it's powering some crucial loads, we can split up these circuits, split up those plugs onto separate circuits so that it doesn't cook just one breaker. And if it was powering something that was really crucial to that plant or that commercial property, then we're going to avoid real costly downtime.
What are some of the key benefits of using thermal imaging for facilities managers and property maintenance teams?
The key benefits to thermal imaging is to get ahead of a problem like an overloaded circuit before it becomes a bigger problem like some failed devices or a cooked panel, or in the worst case scenario that we have seen, an overloaded phase where the complete destruction of switchgear happened and they were 2 months out to get new switchgear. So getting ahead of those massive problems with some small preventative maintenance billing, that's a huge factor.
How does the thermal camera enhance your ability to identify electrical issues compared to traditional diagnostic methods?
Good question. So with traditional diagnostic methods, we would probably do something like maybe a tug test, or maybe put a clamp-on meter onto each individual circuit, which could also have those wires wiggle out. And if there was something that wasn't quite tight enough, that wire might pop out and kill the circuit for that day, which could be really crucial if that's going to be what's powering your internet, or maybe someone doing some serious tasks on a computer, or if it's just going to power up lights that are in an office. Now you got an unsafe situation. So with the thermal imaging camera, we can tell which circuits are overloaded rather than manually putting a clamp on each circuit, which would also help tell us, but also rather than tightening up each old breaker, especially the last scenario we did, we were tightening up the breakers as a part of an additional service, and some of those breakers were so old that they would literally fall apart when you touch a screwdriver to them. So this way, if you have some really crucial old services, you can get ahead of it by seeing what's overloaded and what's not before you start touching it.
Can you share an example of a common electrical issue that thermal imaging can detect early on, potentially preventing larger problems?
Absolutely. Phase imbalance would be a huge one. Overloaded circuits would be enormous. If you're going to have any heat loss, that's energy wasted. So the big factor with that is when you have an old building and maybe you've been through 5 different electrical companies and they've all put on different circuits on different phases and no one did any sort of load balancing, well, chances are pretty good your red phase or your line A is going to be overloaded. And we've gotten to see that time and time again. It's a very consistent problem. And what can happen with that is at your main distribution or your main switchgear, with an overloaded red phase, for example, if it's rated for 600 amps and it's consistently drawing, say 500 amps on that phase, and maybe you got 200 amps on the other 2 phases, well, it's going to overload everything a little bit differently, starting with the transformer, but also on that switchgear. If it's not balanced, it's going to cook and something's got to give. So if we can get ahead of that and get ahead of that downtime by maybe scheduling it for an hour for a reconnect and distributing some loads elsewhere and spreading it out evenly, then that's going to save a whole lot of time and a whole whack of money.
What are the safety benefits of using thermal imaging technology when inspecting electrical panels?
A big safety benefit of using a thermal imaging camera over traditionally getting in there with a clamp-on meter and getting in there with a screwdriver and tug testing would be the fact that when I go through this live panel, if we do it 1,000 times and just one time you have an overloaded circuit and it does pop out and now it does arc out, now you have an arc flash in your panel. Not only is that going to pose a serious safety risk for the electrician and anyone else in that room, but if you do that 1,000 times, someone's going to get hurt eventually or worse. So big safety aspect of that is first coming in with a thermal camera to see what circuits are overloaded before you actually have to do any work. If you come through with a screwdriver and a clamp-on meter, yeah, it'll do it, but it's not really a repeatable process when it comes to safety. And as a core certified company, we have to do everything in our power to make sure the jobs are done safely.
How can thermal imaging contribute to energy efficiency and cost savings in commercial buildings?
Yeah, great question. Energy efficiency, as with any equation ever, is energy in equals energy out. So the closer you can get to 100%, perfect. So any sort of noise, any sort of heat loss, any sort of vibration, that's all energy out and not in the ways that we want, like LED lighting or maybe heating or cooling. So it's not going to be a massive game changer or give you massive energy savings unless you have a massive building with maybe 30 panels. But at that point, yeah, the more heat loss that happens because of an overloaded circuit, as the wires get warmer, as the breakers get hotter, that is going to increase your kilowatt usage because the resistance is going to add more current. So at the end of the day, that will not change your energy bill in a drastic way, but is it a step in the right direction? Yes. More importantly, it's a safety concern and maybe a preventative maintenance concern to avoid costly downtime later, but absolutely it has energy benefits.
What kind of training or expertise is required to effectively use thermal imaging for electrical diagnostics?
There's a lot of courses out there that you can, even as a consumer, join to learn more about how to do thermal imaging and how to operate a thermal imaging camera. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, are you familiar with what you're actually thermal imaging? For example, if you're a home inspector, you need to know how to use your camera to find all the cold spots, like maybe the corners and crevices, for attic insulation, if that's what you're testing. So you need to know more about attic insulation. As an electrician, a master electrician working on electrical panels, I'm going to know what to look for on the panel itself. And the camera is just going to tell me what spots are hot and what spots are not. And it's going to tell me the max temp and the min temp of that shot while I'm a meter away from that panel. So the big part about the training would actually relate to what you're doing, not so much a camera. I think anyone can figure out how to use a thermal imaging camera if they're tech savvy in the slightest.
Can you discuss the role of thermal imaging in preventive maintenance and how it helps in planning repairs or upgrades?
There's a couple laboratory companies that we work with, and we do annual thermal imaging audits of all of their electrical panels. And now it's not so bad, but at the very start when we introduced it there, we found a lot of issues. And at one of their places, we saved them probably in the tens of thousands of dollars, if not the hundreds of thousands, in finding out that their phases were overloaded. And we found that out after one of their sister labs had actually had a major outage, which ended up costing them with rentals and generators and downtime. Well, not factoring in actual downtime, but 120 grand of billing between electrical and generators and other energy that way. So pretty big savings, especially if it's only going to be, say, $500 for a thermal imaging spot. Not so bad. If you got a whole facility, maybe it's under 2 grand, but you might be able to get ahead of 120. That's a pretty good deal at that point. But yeah, that would be the major benefit, is saving time now so that you don't have to be forced to make it up for it later.
How do you integrate thermal imaging inspections into your regular maintenance schedules? And what frequency do you recommend for commercial properties?
I would advise annually. The big thing is at least get it done the first time. Maybe you do it every 3 years. Whatever you want to do on your own facility, depending on how much work you end up doing on your facility. If you're constantly adding circuits, adding devices, experiencing a lot of growth, then more frequently. But as a good rule of thumb, we would advise to all our commercial clients about every year. And the ones that do have really seasoned facilities operations managers, they do it annually. And they bring us in every year to do a scan on all their panels. And we always find some circuits that are overloaded. And then at that point, we can advise, hey, run a new dedicated circuit over here, seems like whoever's in that office now, maybe they're running more equipment, maybe they're running a space heater, maybe they're running a portable AC unit, whatever it might be, we can get ahead of that and save costly downtime where other shared circuits might kill other rooms that have some crucial equipment.
What advice would you give to facilities and operations managers considering investing in thermal imaging technology for their electrical maintenance programs?
For advice on investing in the thermal imaging, we have the process, we have the equipment, we have the trained electricians. I shouldn't say strained, maybe it was straining back then, but we have the trained staff to do these tests, to do this preventative maintenance. So the advice I would give would just be hire us. If you want to learn how to do it yourself, by all means. If you want to buy the expensive cameras, by all means, go for it. But at the end of the day, it's probably most cost effective to hire it out. Let us do it. Let us give you the nice fancy fluke report. And at the end of the day, we're not going to cut the corners on your job. We can help find out, and it's in our best interest to make sure your system is up to code and isn't going to burn down, because we want to work with you for the rest of your life.